get things started, the first thing we have to do is select our steels. We're using A203E for our bright and 1045 for our dark. Then we move to the trusty Beaumont sander with the platen attachment to clean each and every piece before we stack them. We're stacking each of our two materials in alternating layers for our initial billet. With the billet now up to temperature, it's time to do our first forge weld. With the billet now forge welded, it's time to do what we call making crushed W's. The first step is to use squaring dies to change the orientation of the layers. The goal during this step is basically to re-square the billet 45 degrees off from the initial forge welded billet, basically turning your corners into your flats and your flats into your corners. So you just work the billet underneath the re-squaring dies, and then you can move on to flat dies to get your billet nice and true before we do another restack. Alright, the initial forge weld and manipulation is done. We now have to cut our long billet into small little pieces and do what we call a restack. This will then create the W's that we can then feather. And once again, we're going back to the Beaumont sander to make sure we get all the scale off the surface of each and every piece and get them nice and flat. At this point, we've successfully achieved a crushed W billet. But what we need to do now is make it a tall stack. So once again, we're gonna cut this billet into lots of little pieces, stack them up, and you've guessed it, it's back to the Beaumont grinder to clean everything up before we do our stack. With our final weld done, let's now finally start to do what we call feathering. There's many different ways to do this process, but what's always consistent is you need a dull chisel surface to cut through the center of the billet. This way you're forcing the layers inwards without making a clean cut, and that distorts the pattern just the right way to make it look like a feather when you weld it back together. Here you can see Ben prefers to use a handheld axe to do the hot cutting portion rather than a mounted top die. He feels this gives him more control, and if the cut starts going one side to the other, he can correct it quite easily.
And well, that's the way I do it, gosh dang it.
This is a real nice tip, not only putting a cut block underneath your billet, but a hot cut block so you're not sucking heat out of your billet, and when you cut all the way through, it doesn't dull the edge of your axe. Here you can see how the layers are distorted and squished into the center. Now we'll clean things off on the Beaumont sander once again, re-weld it, and we'll finally have our feather pattern. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and it gives you a better understanding of how Ben Snure makes feather Damascus here at Horny Toad Forge.